Congratulations, you're a first-time manager. You were doing a great job at work, and your leadership took notice and decided that you would be a great leader too. And so one day you were working your job, and then the next you are now managing a team. And that's when you realized everything had changed. You're not just doing your own work and solving your own problems. Now you're dealing with everyone else's problems. You're dealing with their personalities, their expectations, conflict amongst the teams or your team with other teams, your people's motivation, accountability for getting the work done. Oh, and the people that believed in you, yeah, they provide pressure too. So the crazy thing is that you were recognized as being that high achiever that could be a great leader. But the skills that made you that high achiever aren't the same skills that are going to make you a great leader. So many first-time managers walk into their role feeling completely unprepared for what's ahead of them. And you know what? If you're feeling that way, just know you are not alone. This is actually a pretty common situation. So in this video, I'm going to walk you through 15 essential tips that can make or break your success as a first-time manager. So take a deep breath, relax, and we're going to get you the knowledge you need so that you can walk into that job with confidence, knowing you're going to make it. So let's talk about the things that most people have to learn the hard way. First of all, stop trying to be the best worker. We've already said that the skills that got you the recognition from leadership are not going to be the ones that make you the best leader. And it is so hard to step away from that and to think about work as a team versus being the best individual contributor who can get the job done quickly. But the problem is, this is one of the biggest mistakes that new managers make, is they are used to going in and doing everything themselves. They fix the problems, they answer all the questions, and they know how to do things effectively, efficiently, quickly, and that's a mistake. Because if you as the leader are the best worker on the team, you're not helping them to grow. So your job is to take a step back and help your people to now be the go-to person, the best worker on the team. You have to give up that crown to whoever is coming behind you. And that's not easy to do. But if you develop your people and work well with them, they're going to be able to pick up the pace, they're going to be able to learn from you, and they're going to have fantastic careers ahead of them. So that means you have to step back, delegate, and coach. And as hard as it might be, you're going to have to let people learn through their mistakes. Another thing to consider is that leadership is about influence, not authority. At work, depending on your company culture, people may call you the boss, but that doesn't mean that you're supposed to be bossy. So getting the title gives you a positional authority, but it doesn't automatically earn you respect. People want to follow those that they believe in, that they trust, that they see competence in. And so you are going to have to show them that you have that authority. They're not just simply going to blindly follow you. And so you are going to have to influence through clarity, fairness, consistency, and supporting your people. Your team needs to believe that you're the person that has their back, that you're thinking about them, that you care about them, not just about getting the work done. And once they believe in you and trust you, leadership becomes a little bit easier to handle. Another thing that's really important is having one-on-one meetings with your people. This is so crucial. You need to understand your people, not just meet with them when it's time to have a performance review or when you want to know the status of a work product, but to have actual conversations. You know, spend some time finding out what are their career goals? Who are they as people? Know your people well enough to know how many of them actually get energy from that water cooler chit chat versus how many of them just want to put their nose down and get the work done. So, meeting with your people, understanding them is super, super important. And don't just meet with them just to get a status update. And building those relationships is vital to you becoming successful. Another thing to consider is to hire slowly and trust carefully. You know, in many circumstances, when you hire someone, it is a very costly venture. You are talking about, the time and effort it is spent to find this candidate, to choose this candidate amongst other people, and then once they are there, spending the time to onboard them, getting them used to the company and to what work you are requiring of them. If you hire the wrong person, it can take a long time, depending on your company's policies, of having to release them and find someone else. So make sure that you take the time. Best practices in hiring is to look at skills, not necessarily degrees, unless degrees are required for the position you're hiring for. But another thing to do is don't be the only one interviewing this person. Having an interview panel can be just as helpful. Because what we tend to do as human beings is we tend to hire miniature versions of ourselves. And while that sounds amazing, who wouldn't want to work with a lot of people just like them? What we know is that you could potentially miss out on some great talent because of your blind spots. So make sure that you have a panel that is helping you to interview, because this is a very important and potentially costly decision if you make the wrong decision. Another thing to keep in mind, that communication beats intelligence. You don't have to be the smartest person in the room, but you really need to be a clear communicator. Most workplace problems come from unclear expectations, vague instructions, and even assumptions. And so it's not important that you necessarily have all the answers, but that you are communicating the answers you do have. And if you don't have answers, that you're communicating that you will be getting them and you follow up on that. It's so important to make sure that your people understand what is expected of them, as well as how work is going to get done and how it's going to be measured. Another rule of thumb is recognizing your people. Now, we've already talked about getting to know your people well. I highly recommend that you understand what praise looks like to them. There are some people that really want public praise. They really thrive on it, whereas others are happy with just a small thank you or congratulations done privately. So know your people well enough to know what praise looks like for them. But when it comes time to make corrections, if there is something that they are doing wrong that you need to address, always do that privately. If you are in a situation where you can't address a mistake immediately, then make sure that you schedule time or circle back so that you can address that as privately as possible. We work with human beings. They make mistakes. And a lot of times the mistake may not even be their fault. So make sure that when you're going to help them to correct a matter, that it is done in the most respectful way possible. Another thing is your mood sets the tone of work. And this is something that many new managers don't realize. If you are nervous, scared, angry, the team senses it. If you're constantly stressed out, your team is going to be stressed out. And if you are able to be calm during problems, then your team is going to feel more confident when problems arise, because let's be honest, problems will arise. So if you think about a parade, you are the leader of the parade and the team is going to follow. So make sure that if you're having a bad day, because you will, that this doesn't transfer to your team. Another thing to consider is clarity removes 80% of problems. If your team is constantly asking questions like, what exactly do you want? What do you mean? I don't know what the goal is. That's not their fault. As a leader, you need to make sure that they have clear expectations of what is required of them. And in fact, there are many professional companies out there that measure engagement, that this is one of the foundational questions of, is your employee engaged at work? Do they understand what's expected of them? And so you need to make sure that you're defining, what does success look like? What is good versus great work? What are your deadlines? What are the responsibilities? Who is taking care of what? And what your expectations are. When people know exactly what it looks like to win, then they're going to go for the gold. So make sure that you're letting them know how to cross that finish line. Don't be afraid to say, I don't know. We talked about communication earlier, but this just has to be said again. New managers sometimes feel like that if they say they don't know, they're going to look like they don't know what they're doing and they don't know how to be a manager. And that's not the case at all. If you end up pretending that you know everything, it's going to destroy your credibility, and trust me, people can see through that. So, strong leaders will say, I don't know, but I'll find out. And then make sure that you do find out and circle back to them. This is one of the quickest ways to build trust with your team. All right, let's talk about protecting your team from chaos. What we know about human beings is the vast majority of people do not like change. They don't like things that are unplanned, except maybe surprise parties. So one of your biggest roles as a manager is to help them stay focused even in the midst of change and unexpected events. And so whenever anything happens, you need to help them to identify what are their priorities, what are realistic deadlines in the midst of all of this change and chaos, and where you can communicate to them what is going on versus what is not going on. As human beings, we are very creative and we are very good at reading between the lines and reading the wrong thing. So make sure that you're helping to dispel some of their fear by explaining to them what something is not as well as what it is. Help them to prioritize, help them to stay focused, and you'll get through that chaos. Another thing to remember is your decision speed matters. I know as a new leader, you want to make the best decision possible and you don't want to do anything that's going to hurt your team in the long run. But keep in mind that indecision can slow everything down and your team needs momentum. So making decisions when you don't have all the information, is what a lot of leaders have to do. And so you have to go with the best decision that you can make in the moment. You're not always going to be right, and you're going to have to be comfortable with that. But right at the beginning, if you're not really sure, talk with your leadership about how to make quick decisions, because it is very important. Maybe start with making the quick decisions that have the least amount of long-term impact. And so that way, if you do make a mistake, it doesn't feel as big or as important as a decision that would have a huge long-term impact. Maybe that's the one that you go to your leadership with and brainstorm and talk through before you make the decision, at least until you're comfortable with making decisions. But keep in mind, decision speed does matter. So make sure that you're making as quick a decision as you possibly can. Don't get paralyzed by analyzing the entire situation in an imperfect world when you probably don't have everything you need. So another thing to keep in mind is that you have to build trust amongst your people. If you build trust, your people will perform. It is really hard to demand a high level of performance from people who don't really know and trust you yet. They don't understand what your motives are or what you're wanting to achieve, even if you tell them. So it is very, very important that you build that trust through the consistency in how you deal with things, making sure that you're dealing with your team fairly, being honest, and following through. If they feel they can trust you, then accountability becomes a whole lot easier. And if you do what you say you're going to do, it's easy to expect them to do what they agreed to do. All right, have you ever heard of managing up? So many new managers only think about how they're going to manage their team, but they don't think about how their relationship with their leadership now changes. And so as an individual contributor, you were used to doing a great job and getting the results and getting them done. But now you have to report up through your managers about what the progress is, what concerns that you have, what are the expectations of your team. And sometimes you're not going to see eye to eye with your immediate leadership. So you are going to have to learn how to communicate all of these very clearly and to make sure that your leadership understands your perspective on how your team is doing. If you can manage up and not just down, then your team's going to have fewer surprises, which means less chaos and an easier job for you. And then one more thing to think about. Let's wrap this up. The best managers aren't obsessed with control. They're obsessed with developing their people. As you grow your career and you potentially expand into larger roles, there will need to be people coming up behind you that will be able to take on the role that you just stepped into. And so having that long-term leadership mindset is going to set up you and your people for success in the future. You're not just building productive employees. You are building the leadership chain of the company of the future. So, keep in mind that they are going to make mistakes. You're going to have uncomfortable moments, but there's also going to be growth because leadership is a skill. And the more you practice it, the better you're going to get at it. And the better you model what good leadership looks like, the easier it is for your people to learn that skill along with you. So once again, congratulations on your brand new role. It may not be easy, but you're going to be great. And make sure that you check the description and the pinned comment below for more helpful resources on this topic.